Alrighty, Lumberjacks, welcome back to another episode of FDR Logging, because that's who we are, and that's what we're doing. Okay, so this episode, we're actually going to do some loading finally. Not a lot of loading, I don't want to get too caught up, but we're going to load some of these shorts, at least this pile for sure. We're going to start off there. And I had this truck back here, which we were going to do for the loading. So if we turn this sucker around, we can get in the right loading position. So, good topic for today. I had somebody email and suggest this as a topic. So this is, David? I think it was David. David with a number behind it. David something. He's the one who recommended this. So the subject that we're talking about today is multiplayer synchronization and... Hold on, I gotta read it here. Multiplayer versus single player. Could you talk about delay, lag... difference between physics on multiplayer and single player. Okay, so I'm always referring to multiplayer as having a different feeling and a different sensation when you're playing multiplayer versus single player. So in multiplayer, the physics... And okay, so some of this is speculation on my part because I don't have an official word for Giants or from Giants to confirm some of the stuff that I'm saying, but we're going based off of our own testing and years of playing this game, so I think we're fairly accurate in our assumptions. But so what happens in multiplayer is when, like in single player, basically it's just you rendering the logs with your computer and you alone doing everything, so there's no real delay, there's no real issues with synchronization, as in I don't have to share what I'm doing with other people. So if I grab this pile of logs down here and I'm loading it onto the truck, I'm only sharing that information and that physics calculation with my own computer and me playing the game. There's nothing else involved with it. Now, if you switch over to multiplayer, what happens in multiplayer is that you are now sharing this information with multiple people and across multiple areas, like lengths of area, right? I mean, if you really want to get into it, you can look into how lag works with the internet and what is lag, basically, right? So we are playing a game that is very determinant on physics. And the physics that we're using are, you know, if you don't know what physics are, we're basically talking about, you know, the calculation of this log falling into this bunk and bouncing off the other log and touching the other log and touching the grapple and the grapple touching the, you know, it basically all of that stuff that's happening is calculation of physics. And that calculation is done in numbers like a, you know, like a calculator and computer land. So you're done with numbers and calculations and mathematical formulas that create what you're seeing on the visual layer. It's all done by mathematics. So if you are sharing that mathematics with just yourself on this computer alone by itself, it's easy for it to calculate this stuff really quickly in real time just by the sheer might of your graphics card or your processor or whatever the case, right? Now, if you're doing this type of stuff between multiple computers, especially if you're hosting or using a dedicated computer or whatever the case, you now have to take all of the data that the one person, whoever hosting or whatever is hosting, is seeing, and it has to share that information with multiple computers across the internet. And there's a lot of different stuff going on when that happens. You're sharing a lot of updated real-time calculations of stuff that's happening. And now, depending on everybody's internet that's playing in multiplayer, and depending on their connection and their distance from whoever is hosting, that's going to change the speed at which it updates in the game. So when you hear the term lag, when I'm talking about it in multiplayer, or you hear a logging crew say, oh, I'm lagged out, or my ping's really high, like we're having really difficulties with the physics, whatever the case, that is strictly because of the internet quality. And it can be the server quality, it can be the distance of the players, it's lots of stuff that it's trying to calculate. So what we've determined based on playing this game for quite a long time now is that the physics in multiplayer seem to be slightly dumbed down, I guess you could say. And what I mean by that is they're not as accurate as in single player, because what I personally think, and again, this is not confirmed, but I would assume for performance-based reasons, they make it so the calculations are less, which means the physics are not updated as quickly. They're not as accurate as single player. And obviously they want them to dumb down because it's easier to transmit smaller amounts of code and smaller amounts of numbers to other computers if the code isn't as complicated. That's not to say that the physics are completely borked in multiplayer. They're still there. I think they're just dumbed down. They're not as representative of what's actually happening. Again, that is speculation, but that sounds, from a development point of view, like something you'd want to do to optimize gameplay for people in a multiplayer setting. So when we talk about in multiplayer that we're having lag or things are weird, basically what's happening is, like, sometimes you'll hear us say, like, truck moving. And why we say that is we want to let all the other players know that there's a truck full of logs moving, because now what we're doing is we're taking a fully loaded log truck, which we're about to do here in a minute with this load. We're taking this fully loaded log truck full of logs, and every movement that these logs make and shift and fly around inside the bunk is happening in real time and has to be calculated and sent to every single one of those players that's playing, which is a lot of work. Again, maybe you could optimize that better if you had, a multi-gazillion-dollar team that could optimize the game better to use different types of code or something. But for what we have, it's what we got. So when that truck is moving down the road, it prioritizes, or generally seems to prioritize, the movement of those logs and what's happening with them. So what happens is all of those physics happening at once kind of overloads the server a little bit. And what I mean by that is it causes the other logs that the other players are using to glitch out. They'll freeze in place, they will act funny, they will slip and slide, they'll do all kinds of weird stuff, because the physics that we're using are being prioritized by the one that's moving down the road. And that causes it to get glitchy. That's why we always say things like, oh, there's a truck where, hey guys, just a heads up, there's a truck moving. Or I'll tell the buncher to stop cutting for a little while because we have too many trees down. If you have way too many forms of physics happening at once in multiplayer, it causes the game performance to drop. That's why we've learned now in our multiplayer logging crews, we have smaller crews. I only have 4 people on at a time, or 5 people on at a time. And the reason for that is because with a smaller amount of people, there's less of that calculation that needs to be synchronized or synced up between the players while you are playing. So I know it's a lot of mumbo jumbo to people that probably don't know what that is or want to hear it, but I did get asked to talk about that. So here, example, we're driving this truck down the road. Right now in single player, I can calculate everything on this load real simple, no problem, because it's live, real time, and I'm only telling my computer to talk to itself. But if I'm driving this down the road and every single one of those logs moving and bumping into each other, it's actually a real masterpiece if you think about it. The amazing mathematical genius that goes behind allowing that to even happen. Thousands and millions and billions of lines of code being sent all at the same time, telling my computer or my CPU or my graphics card to update and visualize this, while at the same time, in multiplayer, it's sending it to every other computer and letting them know, hey, there's a truck moving, and that truck has this on this log, and this log's moved this much to the left, and blah, blah, blah. So now, if you have a full logging crew of 8 people logging, and you're starting to see the logs glitch out and freak out, now you gotta imagine there's 8 different people on the server, all doing different things with different piles of logs and different physics. So now you're taking that calculation and basically upgrading it exponentially, basically, for people to have to synchronize, which is a lot of work for a server to handle. And then it bounces, and it's got lag, and it's got all this other stuff. It's really, really crazy to think about. But yeah, so David, I hope that kind of answers your question a little bit. But that's what we talk about when there's synchronization issues or multiplayer issues, all that stuff. So that's why it's not always a perfect a perfect scenario when we're playing in multiplayer. Sometimes it's not super great quality, and same for you guys. Like, this game wasn't really built around logging, right? It's farming simulator. It's an old engine that was built for farming, and then they've added logging into it, but we've kind of hit the limits of what we can do. So what I've tried to do as a modder from my perspective is I've tried to make things simpler, as simple as possible. Like right now, this game was not built to be moving the logs like we're moving them. It's not meant to have grapples this large, moving this large sum of wood at once. It's just not designed that way. It works, but it's really not designed perfectly for that in the optimization levels that it has. Again, maybe that could be upgraded in the future by developers, but that's something I would have no idea about. So like I said, as a modder, I try my best to make it as optimized as possible. And the way I've done that is I've spent thousands of hours playing with grapples and playing with log physics and changing tiny little individual numbers within these mods and within these grapples and on this stuff. Just changing little teeny numbers back and forth to try to find the best optimized level to handle the logs and to handle everything properly. And that's kind of where my video where I talk about frame rate comes in, because it's difficult for me as a modder to design something for an environment that's not going to be good. So I designed these mods to work well in a at least above 40, 50 frame rate environment. That's why in that video I talked about if your frame rate drops below 30, you're going to have a bad time logging. Your logs are going to slip around. It's not going to be good. So people say, well, why don't you design it so it works good in 30 frames a second? And I said, well, I could make it so all the logs are super frictiony, the tracks are super frictiony, everything's like super glued to the ground basically, and that is definitely something that is possible that I could do. But unfortunately, anybody playing in like the smooth 60 frames a second is not going to have an optimal logging experience. It'll be very, very stiff and rigid feeling and not fluent like you're seeing right now. It would be a lot more fighting with the logs and fighting with the grapples, and your trees or your tracks and your machines would not flow as nicely. There's lots of factors and lots of reasons why we don't do that. And that's why we don't. So now you guys know. But yeah, always good stuff to keep in mind. It's always a struggle too, trying to balance out multiplayer lag. And again, I mean, it comes down to we've done so much testing in multiplayer with maps and trees. So ground rules for multiplayer, if you want to have a good experience for logging. This is all strictly for logging, because logging is the most physics intensive part of this game that you can do in terms of abusing the engine. So keeping the player count lower is one way to fix it. Less synchronization is always a bit better. The less players, the better the synchronization, the better experience. The best experience you'll have is with one or maybe two other loggers at a time, max, and no more than that playing in a hosted game. That's the best experience you're going to get. The more you add, the worse it gets, because the more you're synchronizing. So that's one rule of thumb, is always make sure you have a smaller amount of players. Small logging crews works out better. I wish we could do huge ones, but it's just not in the cards with the technology that we have right now. Rule number 2, do not cut down too many trees. Stay in a nice small group, and that's also why having a smaller amount of players is easier, because you can kind of keep track of how much... Actually, I'm going to go do a loop and come back here. You can keep track of how much logs are being cut down and used. So smaller amount of logs, like in multiplayer, you probably wouldn't want this many piles down, because it would just be a lot of synchronization. Or if they were down, you would not want to be touching all of them at the same time. So the similar effect that we get with our lag in single player when there's too many logs down, we get that same effect in multiplayer, just with a smaller amount of logs, because it's easier to get lagged out in multiplayer. I'm just going to chuck these logs in front of us here so that we're pulling from one pile. Or actually, I can just load the back bunk while I do that. Let's be productive here. This one might not be as nice of a bunk, but that's okay. So yeah, rule 1, less players. Rule 2, less logs. Rule 3 would be maybe, I'd say internet connections of the people playing is a big one. And distance. Distance can matter. I feel with a smaller amount of players, the distance isn't as big of a deal. Because like we play with people from Scotland and the US and Canada and Germany and all over the place, all over the world, Australia even. And yeah, the less players, the better. But the distance also does play a factor for sure. Or the distance, the internet connection also plays a big factor. So if you got somebody playing on a really poor internet connection, like, you know, lower dial-up quality, crappy connection versus somebody who's got, you know, gigabyte internet, you're also going to have some differences there. So have all your players having decent internet, have all your players not cutting down 50 million logs is a bonus, and having your players, I guess closer is better. If you're all in the US, it's probably a better experience than if half are in different countries, but we won't hold that against the guys over the sea there. So there's that. What else can I say? Mods are a big part of it too. If you have a lot of piles of different mods or alterations to the game, that can cause conflict in the game as well and the servers. So start with a small amount of mods and then just add slowly over time. And if you start running into issues, start backing off, and you know, kind of play the balance of that act a little bit yourselves. But yeah, very important things to remember when playing in multiplayer. We'll call this episode the rules of multiplayer. There you go. How not to lag out. But I mean, I've gone over the physics side quite a bit just in single player. So really, the physics rules that we use in single player also, I would say, oh man, little sneaky bugger, also apply to multiplayer. Sometimes you got to tamp them down with that little stabilizer there. Yeah, same rules apply to single players that do multiplayer. And it's not a real big difference. Keep it simple, stupid, as they say, right? I dream of the day that we can have a game that has, where you could go cut a 40 mile cut block of wood and have it all decked and ready to go and move on to the next section. That would be super cool. And then just have loaders coming in. I mean, that's the dream. I mean, if you really want to do that, you could just go get the job in real life. But man, if we could accomplish that, that would be a pretty wild goal. And I don't say it's something that's impossible, but definitely something that's a little bit trickier to do. Yeah, multiplayer. Multiplayer is always a bit of a hiccup. There's also other factors in multiplayer as well that cause, sometimes can cause issues. I might be able to get another ream of shorts. Let's go for a walk here. Such as, like, floating tire tracks and floating tracks in general, or like the issues I was having with the claws detaching when you push down on them into the ground. That stuff I can't even really account for. I have some theories on what's causing that, but I can't really account for it in terms of, oh, it's definitely this, because I don't know if that's exactly what it is, right? I don't have a clue. So there's certain little factors of glitches and stuff in multiplayer, and as much as it can annoy some people, you got to realize there's limits. Again, with what I explained about the code and, you know, some of the intricacies that are going on behind the scenes that you guys don't even see in a mathematical way, that's all stuff you got to take into account. So as much as we all want a perfect world for modding and everything to work out great, it doesn't always work that way. It doesn't always work that way in terms of how the whole cookie crumbles in the multiplayer world. And with servers. Servers are a bit of an interesting thing. What's this ugly grab of wood here? Let's just... I don't know if I'll be able to... I might be able to fit that on the back bunk, actually. It's all starting to float around a little bit there. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this sideways. Let's go grab that truck. Just tab to it because we're lazy. We'll just back it right up over there. Yeah, so I mean, David, that was an excellent question, because I do understand how I talk about it a lot, where I'm like, oh yeah, we had this lag issue, or we have this sync issue, or synchronization issues, or they dumb down multiplayer, and people are like, what does that even mean? Why are you even talking about that? Like, I don't understand. So yeah, hopefully that somewhat answered the question anyway. Oops, kind of being a bad driver here. I'm just gonna kind of half-arsely loop this over here. I'll go right in here. Let's kind of park in the middle here. But yeah, it's a good question. Very good question. Let's see if we can maybe pack these up a little here. I don't really want to open that too much because we got a pretty wide claw. I'm gonna have to put them this way. So I'm gonna overhang the bunk a little bit here. Whoop. Yeah, that worked out, eh? Not bad at all. It's not like pretty or anything, but it's how you say it's on there. Let's throw these on there too. But yeah, you guys are going to find all kinds of anomalies in multiplayer. And I mean, I get lots of bug report stuff, and I get lots of emails and stuff regarding the dedicated servers. There's definitely a few things I'm working on to try to improve stuff. I know the processors are a huge issue, and I can't tell if that's to do to the delimiter script that's causing the processors to stop working in dedicated servers. It could also potentially be the fact that they are dedicated processor heads. They're not connected to the machine directly. That could be part of the issue. So we're gonna have some experimental time to try to figure out some of that stuff for sure. Oh, these are some weird little short pieces, so we're just gonna trickle that in there. All right, let's call that a cleanup load, and we'll head that to the mill real quick here. We can unload that pretty fast, as we saw in that last load. But yeah, like I said, I ask people if you're noticing stuff like major issues, please keep reporting it. I do read the bug reports, regardless of some of the people saying I don't. I absolutely do, and I have a list. I do have a list of all of the bugs that are currently reported. I feel like I should make that list public and just put it on the website and have like an open page where I have known reported issues. That way people can realize I am checking them all the time. But I was like, for the amount of updates and stuff I do you guys really think I'm not checking them? Come on now. No, I know most of you guys don't, but there's a couple who said, you don't even look. I was like, oh yeah. I have it hooked right up to my email. Trust me, I have tons of bug reports, and some of them aren't even bug reports, they're just questions, and it's like, all right. But the thing is, you guys, I made the bug reporting part anonymous strictly because I don't want to reply to every single bug report, especially if some of them are unfixable or they've already been fixed, and it's really hard for me to respond to every single inquiry. So yeah, I was thinking about maybe making a public bug list. I don't know if I'm gonna do that or not, but I might, just to show that it's like, hey, this is issues we know about, we're aware of, we want to fix them, but we haven't yet, or it's unfixable by anything that we've found so far, kind of deal. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Something might happen there. You never know. Let's scoop off this stuff. Oh, that was a good little grab. Yeah, I love these freaking grapples. They're just so realistic now. I don't have to worry about the wood. I mean, sometimes the logs, like when you pick up this little crap, sometimes the logs glitch out a little bit, but I mean, for the most part, pretty good grabs. They're not like freaking out too bad or glitching out. Staying in the grapple and stuff when I'm dumping. That's really kind of all you can ask for. But like, look at these grabs. Just rolls up in there all nice. Schwunk. Kind of feels like I'm unloading a real life load of logs. It's kind of crazy. I didn't think we'd get there, boys, but we got there. There we go. Oop. Slip this over here. So yeah, like I said, if you guys have more multiplayer questions, I think I addressed everything that I can address, at least that I'm aware of in multiplayer. There's probably stuff I didn't address, and who knows, might be something I can't fix or that I may not even know about. You never know. Oh, that's a bit of a greedy grab there. Let's see if that goes through. Ooh, one of the bombs getting a little slippery. Oh, we got her. I do that in real life too. When I was unloading, I'd over grab sometimes like crazy, just because it's like the end of the day and you just want to get the shit off the truck. You don't really care. And then I'd watch the one on the bottom, or like that one on the top that's kind of bouncing around there. I'd just watch it and be like, oh, it's gonna fall out. And then sure enough, it usually did. I started getting a pretty good eye for knowing when I was gonna fall out, so I didn't swing it over anything that I didn't want to drop the logs on. Pretty funny. Whoops. Let's slip this right down here. And one more grab and we got her. That was pretty good. At least we got rid of those 2 major piles. But you see how fast the loading goes? That's why I try to make like lots of piles ahead of myself. Like we got rid of almost 3 piles, or 2.5 piles there just in one episode. So I'd like to be like a few piles ahead of myself. So in the next episodes, we'll just continue processing and bunching and keep the pile going. You know what's also nice is look how like nicely uniform these sit. Hey, like they're all almost touching each other. They sit all nice. There's no huge gaps. Beautiful. Beautiful. How much was that worth? 56,839. I didn't even see the other load. I wasn't looking. I was too busy chatting. But yeah, anyway, hopefully that answers your hearts and desires questions about multiplayer. I might put this in an FAQ on the website in the future, just for a reference point for people that are confused or lost by the way multiplayer works. But yeah, anyway, hopefully that gets you figured out. Remember those rules, right? Remember the rules. It's not Fight Club. Tell everyone. All right, guys. We'll leave it at that, and we'll catch you in the next one. See ya.